Welcome to Tipping the Scales, Mass Balance, and Textile Chemical Recycling. So today is going to be just a discussion on how mass balance can help us as we work to scale circularity. So next slide. So today's agenda, we're just going to talk about, what is mass balance? We're going to frame this. What is it that we're seeing and what are the opportunities? Next slide. So, just a quick about accelerating circularity. We talk about ourselves as being an action-oriented nonprofit focused on textile to textile recycling at commercial scale through a collaborative stakeholder-led approach. And this is an example of our collaborative stakeholder-led approach. We work through ACTOR, our Alliance for Textile Chemical Recyclers. Our mission is to build circular systems that turn used textiles into new raw materials. And we believe that we'd all like to get to a world in which textiles are no longer wasted. All right, next slide. So, just a little bit more about us. We talk about connection, we talk about action, and we talk about transformation. At Accelerating Circularity, we think that, creating connections between all of the actors in the system, we've obviously got to move, we've got to take action so that we can transform this industry. And we will see, as a result of that, measurable impact. All right. Okay, let's move on. So today we have with us, we're really lucky, two of the members of the ACTOR group, Maurizio Crippa from Green and Jean Hegedus from Lycra. Jean, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Carla. Hi, everyone. I'm the sustainability consultant to the Lycra company. I was the sustainability director there for 5 years. I retired, semi-retired in 2024 and have been staying on working on specific projects related to our renewable Lycra and also T2T recycling. So just a little bit about the Lycra company. If you don't know who we are really a solutions provider to the industry, as our name suggests. Our key product is Lycra fiber, and we have a number of different technologies that go around that. We also have another stretch alternative, Lycra T400 fiber. And we have a specialty polyester business where we sell Coolmax and Thermalite. And today, that business, what we sell, about 85% of that is recycled. So we're very proud of that. And I would say in terms of recycling, some of the things that we're doing on the Lycra side, we are working with a number of different recyclers around the world. We know that elastane has been a challenge, but our goal is to be able to, and we've got pilots going on right now where we have successfully extracted Lycra fiber from fabrics, working with our recyclers, and then we take that back and respin it into Lycra fiber, into new Lycra fiber. So we were one of the founding members with Karla on ACTOR and very pleased to be here today and join the conversation.
Great. And Maurizio.
Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. And thank you, Karla, for inviting me. My name is Maurizio Crippa. I'm the CEO and founder of GR3N or Green. I am a material scientist, so I'm a technical guy, and I work in depolymerization. I develop and created with my colleagues the technology for the recycling of polyester textile or polyester packaging if it's needed. And this is what the company does. We are still under development. We have almost completed the development of the technology. We are now designing the final industrial plans. We try to get to the EPC phase at the end of the next year. So we are practically at the end of the development. We already announced that we will realize the first industrial plant for 40,000 tons per year of new polymer produced. in Spain in 3 years, more or less. That's all.
Great. Thanks, Maurizio. Everybody's anxious to get things online as fast as we can. All right. Next slide. So today, right, what we hope to do is have everybody who's joined us today leave with a clear understanding of what mass balance is. What are some of the potential challenges and implementations, and also understand why alignment between all the different value chain members and through brands that we are all on the same page. And how everybody can contribute and engage. So this is meant to be a conversation. So I'm going to kick it off with just a basic question. How, Jean and Maurizio, would you describe mass balance?
Well, I'll take a shot at that, I guess. So I would say, first of all, it's a certified system. I think certification of mass balance is extremely important because we need that verification. And it's typically used when we want to track sustainable inputs and outputs, and we don't have dedicated production or a situation where we can have certification of certain inputs. It's typically used with blended fabrics, where you might be in some cases blending fossil-based inputs with recycled inputs, or it could even be blending different types of recycled, pre-consumer and post-consumer. But I think it's also very important to realize that it's part of the journey to circularity, and it's something that allows us to get started at scale today. And then hopefully as we move along, we will have more and more availability of more sustainable feedstocks, and eventually some of these facilities that are doing mass balance, eventually maybe they will get to a point where they can be entirely recycled material. So that's kind of my little take on it.
What about you, Maurizio? How do you guys think about mass
Well,
balance?
yeah, for us is very important. Let's talk about numbers. So we're gonna have an industrial scale plant with a potential production of 40,000 tons of polymer. It means that we produce monomers equivalent for 40,000 tons of polymer. So today, a typical polymerization unit, so a facility producing the polymer, one line is around 150,000 tons. So I have to provide monomers for 40,000 tons, but they need for 100, 150. So here I have two options. Or I store materials in silos in my plant and transfer to them slowly. They do campaign of production, or we do mass balance. Doing campaign is theoretically feasible, practically impossible, because my production is the 40% of their production or 30% of their production. And when we change the two monomer, what happens? We have a blending, and we do not control, because I started to introduce mine on a fossil base. So there is a transition time. But if we work with the mass balance, is for sure the X% of the material fully recycled. There is no doubt about this. So it's a logistical point for me.
So that's interesting that you're talking about it logistic, because for Actor, right, our working group to decide to talk about mass balance to deliver this paper to the marketplace, it had to do with the things that you're just talking about, Jean, the things that you mentioned, but also too, Um, wasn't there, there was it includes, there's, as this change happens, right? The current products are at a very low price, so there's price, there's quality, there's consistency, there's volumes that, the whole supply chain needs.
Jean?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, when you look at recyclers today, one of the biggest challenges too is getting a consistent and reliable supply of feedstock, right? So everybody would probably love to have, 100% recycled from post-consumer garments. The reality is, when we look at some of the recyclers that we're working with that are commercial today on the polyester side, getting post-consumer waste on a consistent basis is very, very difficult, very challenging. And so you really, I think, need that flexibility of having different inputs. And the recyclers that are the most successful financially are the ones that are able to use those different inputs to keep running.
Maybe I can add one point. Also, in terms of cost, it is evident that if I have 40,000 tons to polymerize, and if I use an existing facility, I'm not to invest in the capex for the polymerization. So evidently, it helps to mitigate the impact cost. It is evident that in the moment that we introduce recycling of textile, garment to garment, and today is not a reality. But we are talking about 60 million tons per year of polyester produced. But how many garment chemical recycling or garment recycling are in place in terms of capacity today? Almost zero. So it's an infant technology that solve a problem, avoiding incineration, but it needs time to install capacity. So whatever is helpful to mitigate the lack of scalability, it's a fundamental for us to bloom the technologies and to bloom the market.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's right. I mean, you don't want to wait for perfection, right? You don't
Exactly.
want to sacrifice progress for perfection.
Exactly. So I can't realize the first plant of 1 million tons. It's going to be crazy. It's a first of a kind. I have to limit to 40,000 tons, which is a big size. Because later on, I need to feed the plant, as Jean, you were saying, You have to collect all these garments to put for 40,000 tons. What is the collection? It's limited today. So
Yeah.
everything grows together.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think actually we're seeing some of that. I mean, actually, Actor does also have chemical cotton recyclers with us, and you're starting to see that in the chemical recycling business, right? Where some of the recyclers are working with some of the existing man-made cellulosic suppliers, where they're able to, put their chip into the current system so they can get it adopted. So, one thing we didn't mention is there is a sort of standard for mass balance, ISO 22095, right? Where it starts to really define mass balance so that everybody can sort of understand what it is. I think you both described it really well. But there is a standard, and there are different versions of mass balance accounting. So, one of the things that I think is happening, right, is there's some confusion around mass balance. I think, Maurizio, you might have done this, a lot of work on this, even with European Union, on wanting to make sure that everybody understood what mass balance it is and why it was so important.
Yeah, there are different kind of mass balance. We have to anticipate this. The mass balance we are mentioning here is a mass balance which is practically an identification of a mass, of an amount that goes with another mass. And then you are able to identify 40%, 30% is recycled. This is a kind of mass balance. The confusion arises when we are talking about the mass balance that is typically utilized for the recycling of polyolefins. In the case of polyolefins, what happens in the recycling is that they take the polyethylene, but they do not produce after the reaction 100% polyethylene monomer, but only 15%. And they produce different chemicals. In this case, the mass balance takes a valorization of this lower fraction of the recycle, and they simulate like it's upgraded to the polyethylene. This is a mechanism that works and is needed by polyolefins recycling, but not for polyester, polyamide, or cotton. So the confusion comes when people say, oh, mass balance is that one, this complicated material. I don't want it. Too much complication. But it's not like that. There are different mass balance. I use the simple one.
Yeah, I think there's different ways of using mass balance and different types of mass balance. Sometimes, uh, and we have, for example, our new renewable lycra. There's one component of that that is entirely derived from corn. It's made in a dedicated facility. That's all they make. But the corn that comes in to that facility comes from over, thousands of farms. And not every farmer wants to get ISC. We use ISCC certification. Not every farmer wants to get ISCC certified. So because of that, we need to use a mass balance system whereby our provider is going out and getting the number of farms certified that will cover the amount of corn that is used in our product. But they also sell, into other applications, non-apparel applications, and things like that. So, the equivalent of that product will not necessarily be certified, and they don't have a a system where they can say, okay, this ton of corn that came in was from a certified farm, and this one was not, so it gets mixed. So even though it's a dedicated facility, we're using a mass balance certification, to track and trace the product throughout the distribution chain. So I think there are many different ways you can use mass balance, but certainly in recycling, when we have a lot of blends and materials that need to be recycled, in it's an accounting system, if you will, for being able to track what is the sustainable inputs, as you said, Mauricio, kind of, in a large sense, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every single kilo of fiber is going to have that amount of a particular amount of sustainable content in it, or recycled content in this case.
Yeah, correct. Not every kilos contains this kind of bio-based carbon or recycled carbon, but the entire mass is
Right.
for sure recycled, for sure bio-based. The point is that the trackability gives the anti-fraud by definition, because you cannot invent material that is not recycled and claim it's recycled. This is the amount, this is the amount. So it's a securing system. It's a secure system.
Actually, if you look actually of ISO 22095 2020, right? There's one, two, three, four, five different versions of that we describe um, in the report, tipping the scales that we put out. So if that's something that you're interested in the absolute details of that, if you go to the report, you're actually going to see that there. I think that there is also some examples of how the textile industry currently uses mass balance. It's not like it's something new, right? Currently gets used. Do you guys have some examples of that?
Jeannie, please.
Yeah, so certainly well, I'll give you one that's not even really related to a specific textile product, but where many companies, including the Lycra company, have used. We have our 2030 sustainability goals, and one of those is that we reduce our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions by 50% by 2030. That was off of a 2021 base. And part of that we've done different things at our sites in terms of our energy usage, but we also at some of our sites we have used renewable energy certificates. And this is very similar to what you as a consumer might do if you receive a letter, let's say from your utility company, that says, "Would you like to have renewable energy?" And typically what happens is you will pay extra to have renewable energy, but the actual kilowatts that are coming into your house may not be from wind power or solar power. They may be from a mix of whatever is in that grid. But your utility company is taking that money and reinvesting it to green the grid, right? The premium that you're paying. And they can only sell the amount of renewable energy that's in their grid, and that gets essentially, different states and different countries have different laws about this, but it is definitely regulated. So that's a way that a lot of sites are using mass balance.
I actually, even in, I mean, and I know we're trying to move away from this, right? That's why these technologies that you both are working with um, are in development. But, when we talk about bottles we're talking about bottle to textiles. I know that some of the thermomechanical recyclers out there, they use bottles from a variety of different places based on the color of the bottle so they can get the clarity that they want, so they can get also potentially the price that they want, right? Colored bottles are less expensive, but you don't get the clarity. You can't dye it the way that you want, right? So those are important things and reasons that we blend different materials going into the system. So technically speaking, the idea of balancing mass balancing things gets used throughout the textile industry. It gets used in cotton, where somebody might put in a percentage of organic cotton or recycled cotton. Those time things today don't have any pushback from the industry for the most part, as long as it can be traced.
Yeah, and thinking about the packaging industry, for example, they use a lot of mass balance.
Mm-hmm.
The packaging industry, for example, they use 100% recycled PET in this bottle, sold in Italy, but it comes from other countries of Europe. And they take into account, but they cannot play with. That's the point. You cannot play with the amount. They cannot claim it's 100% here and 100% in all their production, because when they have finished, they have finished.
Yeah. I mean, BCI cotton is another example that's been in use in the industry for quite some time, right? So it isn't, it shouldn't be totally unfamiliar to folks, but it is sometimes, I think some people have a hard time sort of wrapping their head around that it's not a specific content in that specific garment that they might be getting.
Well, you can do that, right? If you really want it, but the cost, right?
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
complexity that you're asking of a supply chain is, quite onerous, right?
Mm,
So the reality of what somebody might want and the ideal, to your point earlier, right, Gene, you were talking about let's not, try and be perfect, right?
right.
Perfection is going to kill there's a phrase about perfection being um, you know, can't remember. I'm so bad at those things, but perfection kills
Progress.
the
Yeah.
rest. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it takes time. It's a matter of timing. In the future, one day, when the bottle industry started to recycle the PET bottles, they produce a fraction of recycled polymer compared to the market. And now they have a lot of material around, and almost everyone can have some recycled content. It took 30 years, 40 years.
Let's hope it doesn't take us that long, Maurizio.
I hope, but consider that we have to fill 60
Yeah.
million tons.
But that's a really
60.
good point. I mean, when you look at other industries like even paper and bottles, glass recycling, they have very high rates of recycling today, but it did take decades to get there. And I know we're in a different time and place right now, and we are all trying to accelerate, right? But there's only so much that can be done in a given time period. So uh, that's
Yeah.
why technologies like mass balance are so important because it can get us there a lot faster than if we were to wait for dedicated production, and it's just not financially possible in many cases.
I recall that one of the reasons that, if we look at again, look back to the report was, the reason that we're moving, right, to recycle textile to textiles is because of the incredible problem that we have with the amount of used textiles, and those numbers continue to grow. Um, and I think the brands really have that desire. They want to make sure that their products aren't floating around in places where they shouldn't once they've reached the end of their useful life as a garment.
Mhm.
Yeah, later on, it's a matter of end of life to manage the end of life of the garments. But this is going to be a webinar regarding how we can recycle, what we have to do in order to recycle. That's another story.
Absolutely. So
The value chain is very long. Collection, sorting, preparation. Woohoo.
you're right. It's another webinar,
It's
right?
another webinar.
So, so I think we've talked about it a little bit, right? But we sort of had written down as kind of one of the things that we should talk about is why specifically, or is it not specific to just new recycling technologies that need mass balance?
Well, as I maybe Jean, please go. Ladies
No,
first.
no, go ahead, Mauricio. That's fine.
Well, as I said before, it's a matter of capacity. It's a matter of capacity because we don't have the capacity to satisfy all the appetite of all our clients, first. Second, when we have this lower capacity, we cannot count on a scale factor. So for me, a plant of 40,000 tons is one capex. A plant for 400,000 tons, it's a completely another capex. And this impact, third point, on the final price of the polymer. So today, we need something to mitigate the impact, the impact of these three factors on the final cost. In the meantime, we reach the capacity that we wish to have.
It's interesting, and we haven't spoken about the need for regulations to come in to talk about this because I think it's had an
Mm,
impact, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, regulation
Yeah.
has a huge impact.
No, I mean, there's obviously there's legislation popping up all over the world, and for end of life garments handling, right? And if you look at the EU Green Deal, it's certainly the broadest and probably furthest along. But when you look at their goal, they say they want textile products on the European market by 2030 to be largely both durable and recyclable, right? And that there will be the vision, right, was that by 2030 there'd be sufficient capacity of fiber to fiber recycling. Well, if we don't have mass balance, we don't come anywhere near to meeting that goal. And so, you can't build enough plants, dedicated sites, and as Mauricio said, the financial implications of doing so are just impractical. So we need both. We need both to, come anywhere near to meeting those kinds of goals.
I think that's a really important point. How do we really, I mean, I think, you know, Maurizio talked about it, but you didn't sort of really it's the way to scale, right? It's you said, hey, you have to do this because you've got to blend it so that we can sort of start integrating it. But we're integrating it so that we can really scale. And that's not going to happen if you have to, like you said, have to have the capex for a 40,000 ton plant or a 400,000 ton plant, right? Or whatever it is. I mean, I'm floored by the size of traditional polyester plants in the marketplace. What are those, Maurizio?
Yeah, you have to think about that. That today, the recycled content in textile of polyester comes from bottles. Why it comes from bottles? Because at the end, there are companies that takes bottle clean, grind, and produce pellets, which are identical with the pellets that coming from fossil. So the integration and the spinning of these chips is relatively the same than spinning chips from in the same machine, in the same plant, spinning chips from fossil. But another story is when you have to take garments and recycle garments. In the garments, you have a lot of contaminants because the function are very broad. I need something warm. I need something that dry very fast. I need something with black, yellow, stripes, drawings, whatever. So the recycling of these kind of garments is not just washing, melting, go. No, it doesn't work like that. We have to apply chemical reaction. We have to purify monomers. So the complication for these plants is huge. A chemical plant cost more than 100, 200 million euros for 50,000 tons. A recycling plant of chips from bottles cost one order of magnitude lower. So how we justify this such a huge investment? If we have a market, if we have a price, if we have a demand. At the end, if we have a demand to satisfy the appetite of everyone, also the investors. Sorry, I'm very practical in my answers, but this is the day by day of a technology provider.
Yeah, absolutely. Dean, did you have anything on that?
No, I mean, I agree with everything Mauricio said. I think, just to scale, right? We absolutely need mass balance. I mean, we can't scale without it. And it's really, we can look at it as a bridge, right, to get to eventual more dedicated production. But without that bridge, I don't see how we get there.
That's, I think, a very important point. And the other thing that is I think important here, right? Because if we're thinking about that entire supply chain, right? We've got to, Maurizio was talking about how difficult it is. The feedstock that's coming into a chemical recycling plant is very different than, say, using bottles, right? You've got a lot more that you have to do. But your outputs also have the opportunity when we're talking about chemical textile recycling of having virgin-like equivalents out the other end, which I think is, um,
Yeah, that's correct. And
Yep.
this creates another issue at the end because of the comparison between mechanical recycle and chemical recycle is different. It's an unfair competition because the recycled from bottles contains the colorants that were in the bottles. The chemical recycle doesn't contain any colorants. So we need a new category of thinking when we think about the chemical recycle. This is the same for cotton and for other recycled textile. They are different than the virgin one, at least because they are recycled. If they are technically identical like a polyester, they are recycled. Who reward us for all the effort to keep this carbon in the loop?
it's a great point.
This
That's
is a
really
big question mark that I always put to the LCA guys. This is another webinar on LCA and circularity.
we've got a lot of webinars coming.
Oh,
So let's go to the other end of the value chain, and we've got brands now, and the brands want to make claims. And so the question is, how do brands get to talk about their recycled content input when we're using mass balance in a way that they're going to feel comfortable and can support their claims?
So, my experience with this basically is through the certification bodies or certification companies like ISCC Plus. They have very specific guidance around claims that you can and cannot make and how to clarify claims for mass balance. Um, so I think, you know, my first piece of advice, I guess, would be, listen to your certification body. I think there's been talk about mass balance is a type of greenwashing. Well, it's really not a type of greenwashing. I mean, the system itself really can very accurately track your inputs and your outputs, right? But it's I think when people make unqualified claims, that's where you kind of get into trouble. But the types of claims that we have seen are things like, this garment contains the equivalent of X% recycled content. So that equivalent of is very important because it signals that it's not necessarily all that's in there. Or sometimes you have to, say, well, this garment contains X% recycled content via a mass balance approach. I think for consumers, they have no idea what mass balance is, nor should we expect them to. So maybe there is some more work to be done on what's a more consumer-friendly claim. But I think, I think the wording around equivalency or using that in some way is something that maybe is a little more consumer-friendly. So. I would say, your certification body should be giving you guidance on that.
I think there are things that are out there in the marketplace. Is it chocolate and coffee might sort of come to mind. I think there's some examples in the report also. Maurizio, did you have look like you were about to say something?
No, I was thinking about the packaging industry in Europe. From the past year, every single plastic bottle in Europe has to contain 25% recycled content. Mandatory. If you don't put, you pay a lot of money. And today, nobody needs to know the recycled content of this specific bottle because they know at least it's 25% and will be 30% in 2030. So I noticed since 1 year that the only percentage reported in the bottle is when it is 100% recycled. Only if it's 100% recycled, I see the brand putting. Otherwise, they don't need to put because they know, everybody knows that it's recycled content. So in
That
the moment it's recycled, that's okay.
That's actually a really great point, right? Because I actually it sort of leads right on to like how does policy, right? If it's a regulation that it's got to be at least 20%, 25%, how can policy affect mass balance in textiles? Do we need a minimum recycled content claim?
In my opinion, oh, sorry, Jim, please.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Maurizio.
In my opinion, yes, we need a minimum recycled content under control with the mechanism of control that Jean was explaining before. And
Yeah,
we
and
need,
most certifications do have a minimum percent that they allow. So usually it's 20 or 25% in my experience that they will allow you to make a specific claim around it, at least being certified through mass balance. So
yes,
there are
the
some.
point is that in the legislator, if the legislator obliges to have a minimum recycled content to put in the market clothes, this is going to be helpful because this creates the demand. It forces the demand. And this happens the same in the bottle industry. When the minimum recycled content arrived in the past, first there was a minimum collection, separated collection of bottles. Later on, it became the minimum recycled content in Europe. And me as a consumer, I want to see the recycled content because I make an effort to generate the fifth bag of garbage at all and give to the for the collection. It's an effort that every citizen does. So the fact that there is a recycled content is rewarding my effort as well. So it's a virtual circle.
Are there other areas, though, within policy that are working with mass balance in either a positive or a negative way? We had some struggles with policy um, informing the situation in a way that doesn't necessarily help.
I guess I would say there's been somewhat of a lack of clarity on mass balance, specifically in the textile industry, but in the chemical industry, recently the EU Commission they proposed a mass balance accounting approach that excludes fuel. So if you have byproducts that are going into fuel, you can't count those essentially in your mass balance. But they've signaled that this could be like a model for other industries, and specifically did mention textiles. So I mean, hopefully we're going to see more clarity around this subject. But I think without that clarity, people are afraid to make decisions, right?
This is, yeah, and good to that you mentioned the fuel exempt because the mass balance of fuel exempt was the mechanism I described it before to valorize the substance that are not related to polyethylene, excluding the fuel. What was the positive effect? That the company that initially developed the technology to take plastics to depolymerize plastics, they wanted to produce only fuel. But today, with this legislation, they were forced not to produce fuel, so not to burn in another form as a solid, but to a liquid, but to introduce in the system using existing capacity, refineries, to produce high-value chemicals with their oil. So the mass balance fuel exempt helped to create a virtual circle to promote the use of this carbon for added values.
So we talked a little bit about policy and how that can help. Are there other organizations across the textile value chain that we need to embrace mass balance to get it to work at scale?
I think there are a lot of organizations that have embraced it, which is great. So, Fashion for Good is one that we just spoke about a little bit earlier.
Yeah,
Ellen MacArthur Foundation, has a great white paper on mass balance, and they endorse it. There are a number of certainly a lot of people in the chemical industry, a lot of organizations there are endorsing it because it's used there, on a regular basis. But yeah, I think the more of these industry organizations that come out in favor of it, it will push people toward that direction.
Maurizio, anybody that you see that needs to, not necessarily even just organizations, but types of businesses within the textile supply chain that need to really embrace mass balance that maybe,
Brands,
I'm sorry?
brands,
Yeah,
the brands has to be involved, and they have a good power to support, and this gonna create the good pull for the entire value chain.
great. There seems to be quite a few questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to go to the Q&A and ask you guys questions here from the audience. So I'm going sort of backwards. So these are more recent ones. So somebody's asking about minimum recycled content for mass balance. Is this for on-product claims, or if they're off-product claims, can the minimum recycled content be lower? So they're talking about how much, and do you want to put it on your product, or you just want to get it into the product? I think would be the two different points of view there.
I know in terms of ISCC Plus, if you're making an on-product claim, it has to be at least 20% recycled content or renewable content through mass balance. If you are looking at, making a claim, let's say in your sustainability report, I believe you can indicate that you are using mass balance, but you can't make a specific claim around content for something like that. If it's not 20%.
If you were to pick a percent that you would want to be the minimum recycled content, what would you choose?
I'm I'm a technical guy, so I think about the capacity. So I will put a minimum recycled content, but that match with the short time capacity. If we produce 1 million tons of poly, we commercialize 1 million tons on polyester clothes. We need 10%. It means that we need a capacity of 100,000 tons. Otherwise, it's impossible to satisfy the 10% and go on. So I think the minimum recycled content goes in parallel with the installed capacity. A good dialogue among the two, among the legislator and the recycler is going to be very helpful to increase this amount, the dialogue.
Very pragmatic.
Yeah.
I can't think only in pragmatic way.
And actually, just to clarify what I said before, I think it's up to the brand. They can say however much they want to, but if they want to make a claim using the certification body, if they want to reference the certification body, then it has to be that 20% minimum or whatever. If it's a different certification, they have a different level. Some are at 25, I know. But if you want to reference that specific certification, you have to abide by the minimum requirements.
This is an interesting question, and I think one to be answered at this point in time. How might the situation in the Strait of Hormuz and availability of fossil fuels impact mass balance and the outlook for chemical recycling? Maurizio, you seem to like that question.
Well, the Hormuz situation is hopefully temporary and as temporary as possible. So, and the mass balance is a concept that will become in the future. So, I don't think it's going to be an impact on the discussion. But there is another point that we see on the Hormuz crisis is the fact that, especially for Europe, we don't have resources. So we depend from resources from outside of the continent. And looking at recycling, it's not as only recycling, but as a source of good carbon to produce materials that we need. It helps it to be independent from these outside streams.
Yeah, I was very interested to learn that the ships from the Strait of Hormuz, the length of time it takes them to get from point A to point B is actually quite long. I think it can take months and months because those container ships work very slowly.
They
They
have a
go
lot of
very
stuff to
slow.
do.
I'm sorry?
They have a lot of stuff to do.
It's not just the stops, it's just how
Yeah.
slow that the ships go. It's like riding your bicycle across the ocean or something. It's like really slow.
They
Um,
are very heavy, huh?
They're big, so they're
They
heavy.
are
Yeah.
big. They're
yeah, yeah, yeah,
400 meters long,
yeah, yeah.
a
So,
third of a
so,
mile.
so I think that that's an issue, right? It could be. But the other issue that comes up here, though, again, maybe a little bit to what you were saying, is it's changing the cost of oil, right? the cost of oil, if that price goes up, the cost of polyester is going to go up. If the cost of polyester goes up, the ability for these new recycling technologies to be close a gap, even if it's just a little bit, might be helpful. Or do you guys see that happening?
It's a discussion I got in the past. The problem is that the volatility of the oil price is very short. So you have in a quarter you have a high price, and the quarter later is very down, and but the investment are on the years. So mm, I prefer to think more than on the single price, to think about how independent from this volatility you become if you use recycled material.
Yeah, I think
So
it's
you can plan
interesting.
a long term.
I think it's interesting to look at it as a risk management
Yeah,
um, opportunity.
yeah.
Great. And this is interesting because now you have to put on a hat of thinking like a brand. From a brand point of view, what do you think is the biggest issue when it comes to mass balance and textile to textile recycling?
I think brands are looking for, they definitely want verification, and mass balance can certainly provide that. They also want to have a simple message to their consumers, right? A very clear message. And so I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in terms of how do we make the mass balance message a little bit simpler and more understandable for the consumer.
And probably the the control of the production chain. So the brands, there are a lot of passage from the polymer or from the cotton to the final product into the market. And the brands, they have to take care about every single step in order to be sure that this mass balance is not only the mass balance, but what they claim is real. And this is a complication. This is not easy. And it's already not easy today. And they think, oh, if I have to that the mass balance as well, oh no, I have to think about another things to take care. But
Yeah.
the message is very powerful in front of the consumer in the moment they pass the message that the mass balance is by definition anti-fraud. It's not at all a greenwashing, but it's on the other side. It's a guarantee that the job is done well in terms of calculation.
This is an interesting. Go ahead, Jean.
No, I was just going to say that, brands, the vast majority of them have, their own sustainability goals. And so they're looking to meet those. And sometimes, mass balance is going to be necessary in order for them to do that.
Yeah, actually, this is a question in a sense very specific right there. It said our end goal is to achieve physical traceability. That said, we also see that a mass balance approach could help scale in the short term and avoid some of the physical challenges. From your perspective, do you see any risks in starting with mass balance and transitioning to physical traceability later on? Is this something that can realistically evolve over time, or does it tend to lock in the system?
I personally, I think, as I said before, we look at mass balance potentially as kind of a bridge. So I do think it can change, and that is really, I think, what we're all trying to work toward is bringing more and more sustainable inputs into the system, right? So if a facility is using today, let's say on average, they're bringing in 40% sustainable outputs, or sorry, inputs. Um, you know, 5 years from now, hopefully that's closer to 80%, and then eventually potentially gets to 100%. So yeah, I very much do see it as the potential there for a transition.
Maurizio's, your thoughts on that?
I cannot then agree with the gene. Exactly the same point.
Great. Let's all, so mass, now we just have to get the industry to move to mass balance. We have to get the policy folks to agree that mass balance makes sense and we want to move it forward. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope that you were able to get a better understanding of mass balance, the importance of it, how it's necessary if we really want to scale textile chemical recycling, and actually other recycling methods, how we need to have policy behind us. We need to have the brand demand, and we need to have people actually understand what this is. And I think everybody was in agreement that we'd also like to make sure that we have a minimum recycled content standard. And I know that that in itself is quite a big controversy. So, Maurizio, that's on your list of other webinars that we need to hold in the future. So I'd like to thank both Maurizio and Jean for joining us here today and helping us understand mass balance, where it's appropriate, what it can do for the recycling market. And please take a look, go to our website at acceleratingcircularity.org, and you can see the report and download it. It's called Tipping the Scales. It's got actually a longer name than that, but tipping the scales to move mass balance forward. So thanks everybody for your time. I appreciate it very much. And again, thank you to Jean and Maurizio.
Thank you everyone for
Thank
coming.
you. And thank you, Karla, for setting it up.
Yeah,
Fun to
very
do.
good.
I now have a list. We have a whole bunch more we need to do.
That's right.
All right.
All
Take care.
right. Thank you. Take care. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.